Hi everyone, and welcome to ABCs of Anaesthesia. I'm Lahiru.
My name's Cass.
And for the next couple of episodes, we're going to be talking about interviews and interview questions and interview training and how to prepare. So in this particular episode, pretty much Kaz has done some really tremendous work here to organize all the things that you would want to think about before even going into your interview. So really it's episode 1, introduction to interviews. And after that, we'll go through some of the basic interview questions. So let's get started. Let's go through everything we know about interviews.
Everything.
Now, Kaz, what is the point of an interview?
So I think the interview forms an essential part of the selection criteria for most training programs and kind of a lot of professional jobs, really.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of selection panels, it really forms the most discerning part of the process, where it does allow for validation of what they see on the CV, on the cover letter. And it also kind of allows them to make a bit of a judgment on the person's personality and who they are. So I think it's actually quite important. I would argue it's the most important part of your application. Would you agree?
You know, I haven't been on that many interview panels yet, so I've just taken on a new role where I will be doing it far more often. But, you know, I'm faced with the fact that inherently I think interviews are important because I want to meet the person before I hire them. But I'm not sure about the evidence of interviews showing good worker success or fit or anything like that. So, yeah, it's one of those tricky things. I personally feel like I would be able to tell the people I want to have or offer a job to, but I don't know where the evidence is, and I don't think there is good evidence that that's...
So I actually looked this up.
Oh, yeah?
I've looked this up a few times over the last few years as I've just done so many interviews and help people with it. The evidence is quite unclear.
Oh, yeah, weak to lacking?
I think equivocal. And the reason being is I think it's really difficult to determine a good endpoint. So what is a good resident?
Yeah.
You know, it's really hard to measure. And if it's a qualitative assessment of someone, you know, everyone knows how challenging qualitative research is.
Let alone doing that in, 15, 20 minutes or whatever the interview time frame is. How can you possibly know the scope of someone's ability to perform in all the situations that could occur with lots of other variables and people and factors and... Yeah,
exactly. So I was in a conference once where they spoke about the role of the interview in selection into medical schools, and I think what they found was there was strong evidence that a good interview score correlated with, a poor interview score correlated with being more likely not to progress through the course.
Oh, really?
So I think there is some evidence for, as I guess, almost.
If you can make the effort to do well at an interview.
Yes.
Then chances are that effort translates to med school.
Potentially.
But that's all right. We're not here to discuss the merits of an interview. You will, if you're going for any of these jobs, you know, whether it's in anesthetics or in any other part of the corporate world, you'll need to do an interview. So might as well get good at it. And practice makes perfect. So okay, keep going. Yeah.
So I guess, look, it's a chance to differentiate you from the other candidates because, again, going into these jobs, you're very similar to your colleagues. Again, the 80% to 95% of you will be very similar. And so the interview really allows you to differentiate. And I guess it really is about allowing the interviewers to get an idea of your personality, who you are, your communication skills and your ability to communicate in an effective and articulate way. To a lesser degree, your ability to think and solve a problem under pressure. And this might not be a direct assessment, but is often an indirect and kind of a collateral assessment of the process. And I think also is to ascertain consistency with the remainder of the application. Yeah, so as we said, it's difficult to assess and research, but, you know, it's going to be here. And I think everyone likes interviews, and there's a notion that it works. So
it's funny when you said get an idea of your personality, because, again, in that 20 minutes when you got potentially you've got these rehearsed answers, or you've learned a bit of a spiel about yourself, just not to sound too, you know, you're trying to sound like you have prepared at least something, but you're not too prepared. That's a really weird balance, and I just don't know how do you get an idea of someone's personality, really?
Yeah, well, I guess I could throw the question back at you. When you have a new resident or a registrar, how long does it take you to get an opinion of them? Not that it doesn't change afterwards, but an initial impression that is within the ballpark.
I think the research shows that your initial impression of someone is formed in seconds. But again, that's not necessarily correct.
Correct. Yeah.
Which is a problem. But again, doesn't matter. We're not here to argue the merits of first impressions or the validity of an interview.
This is turning into a Sam Harris podcast, La.
That's right. Oh, I wish. Free will.
So I guess we've kind of touched on this, but so as a member of a panel, what are you trying to determine through this process?
Yeah, look, I've thought about it a lot on the other side as well as on kind of the side of it being an interviewer. And it's funny to say, but you're generally going to be interviewed by your supervisors or your bosses who are trying to run a department smoothly. And when you think about what that means, it translates to a lot of things that are almost very little to do with your anesthetic ability again. Though hopefully that is something that you'll all be able to gain competence in. But one of the big keys is being reliable and truthful, because that means that I know that as a consultant, I can be, I can leave a trainee in theatre, I can be on call overnight and know without a doubt that trainee is going to call me if there's a problem, that if I've asked them, have they done something, that they say, when they say yes, it actually means yes, it's not. And if they say something like, oh, it's in the process, doesn't actually mean, it doesn't mean that they haven't done it, but they will do it, like the fact that someone can tell me even difficult answers truthfully and they can show complete reliability, that's really what I want to get out of this interview. And then to a certain extent, so imagine the problems that will cause a department if a trainee isn't reliable or truthful, and what that could mean. That's a staggering problem for any anaesthetic department. But also, if they can pass the exam, and we've got a couple of really big exams, and these will take 9 to 12 months of study if you pass it, and even longer if you fail it. And really, you have to somehow check whether the people you are interviewing can actually pass this exam. And we can go through a few of the things that you might need to do to really show that you can pass this exam. And
why is that important?
If you can imagine, a department runs on the cohesive progress of each of the trainees. To have someone fail, which is horrendous, for the person in the individual in question, but also the fact that there's so much effort put by the whole team, your anaesthetic registrars, the consultants, the nurses, everyone is working towards trying to get you through this process. And I think it's just one of those things that you really want to be moving along in your course. And I'm not saying that if someone fails, that that's obviously a really difficult thing that I think everyone tries to help people with. But on the other hand, if you thought someone couldn't pass the exam, that there was no way they could pass the exam, if the answer to that question is they can't pass the exam, then it's probably not a good idea for them to be in the training program for whatever reason. So these are interesting things because they don't necessarily relate to your ability to be a good anaesthetist. And again, I think that's also something interviewers may want to know. Like on a panel, they'll want to know that you can, work within the hospital guidelines, and you're not going to be doing reckless things, and you're going to progress to become a good anaesthetist. But in that one, in a very small time frame that you're in that department or in the training program, I think they want to know you're reliable, truthful, and you can get through all the hurdles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's all a very fair point. I think the point about the exam, I would never say it's kind of a central marker of who gets on the program, but I think it's definitely something that's on the examiner's mind, and it's more, sorry, not the examiner, sorry, the interview panel's mind, and I agree. I think the primaries of I haven't been through it. So it's a very challenging process, and I think when someone fails, it's very challenging for everyone around you, because it really is a village effort to get people through.
Yeah.
And I think what you can do, and we'll get into this a bit more later on, but you really want to show them that you are academically capable.
Yeah.
And if you aren't, because look, a lot of us didn't study very hard in med school, you want to show that you've realized that it's a big obstacle. And I think if you give any notion that you don't think the exam's a big deal, or that you aren't committed to really altering your life in a pretty substantial way to overcome it, I think that is a red flag. And I think it's mostly, not showing respect for the exam that could work to your
I like that you said that, because I don't want people to misunderstand what I've said, that there's no way that I could even ever know if someone's going to pass the exam or not until they've sat the exam. But and lacking that ability to know, the only way you can really show it is to show that you're serious. You know what this exam means, how many hours of study, that you need a study group, that you need a structure, a timetable, and you need set goals. I think knowing that, it goes a big way, which is pretty much spot on what you said. And it's funny, all of these things, what you've said is literally what was passed down to me from the people that I asked about how to get onto anesthetic training. Yeah. So it's just like, just the just pay it forward, recycling the older things. But I'm really thankful because a lot of these things I didn't actually think about. The fact that one of my mates was like, you got to show that you're reliable, that you're trustworthy, and that you can pass this exam. Yeah. I rate that.
I have a distinct memory of someone who told me that when I was a cricket care resident, and I've been passing that on to everyone ever since. So it's clearly
that's right.
Clearly important.
So I mean, I like in your notes that you've mentioned someone who can contribute positively to the specialty, a person you've presented in the CV. And your cover letter is consistent who you are. So I think that's all very important. And I feel like when we talk about reliability and trustworthiness and can you pass the exam, it's like that's kind of the bare guts of what it takes. But all the other stuff's important as well.
Definitely.
Okay, so Kaz, you've been through these kind of interviews much more recent than I. How do you prepare?
So, look, I think first step, as with our advice for the general application process, you really have to talk to people. I think walking in blind to an interview is really not a smart thing to do because you're putting yourself in a lot of undue stress. And anxiety is bred by the unknown. And I think if you can take away the unknowns as much as you can help yourself. So what I did was I talked to people who sat the interview. I talked to people who've sat on panels in the past or present. They're obviously a bit limited in what they can offer and what they can tell you about the actual questions. But I think just getting an idea for how things run is really important. And really just try to find out, how many people are on the panel, what kind of questions they ask, what kind of questions do they not ask, do they ask clinical questions, do they ask lateral thinking questions? It's all very helpful. And I think you really should know what you are going to get when you walk in. So if there's 5 questions, you have 4, you almost know that they're going to be something you've thought about. 1 is going to be random, and maybe random, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So try to find out what questions have been asked in the past. There are, lists that go around. There are plenty of sources. There's lots of books that are published in the FRCA because I just think the UK tend to do a lot of things better than we do.
That's right. And they seem to be far ahead. Like I remember my consultant job, just going to anaesthesia.uk, and oh my God, like they have consultant interview training sessions there, as well as a bank of pages of questions. And it's amazing looking at some of those questions. I thought, I've never thought about this stuff before until that point of thinking about this. So getting some of these questions and seeing these banks of questions and other resources from around the world is probably useful. Yeah.
And different training programs as well, because interview questions don't really change. There's some stuff that's specific to anesthesia, and critical care. But yeah, they tend to be very much the same. So collect all the questions. I had a big Word doc that I shared with one of my good friends. It was Evernote actually. And then we made our own Evernotes based on that, and where we just quickly went through and answered all the questions. So we just essentially try to formulate an answer and try to think of examples and substantiate our answers. So I'm a big believer in bullet points and not in memorizing banks of prose. I think whether you're a good speaker or a poor speaker, I think a practiced, memorized, rehearsed speaker is worse than both.
Yeah, and we're doing that now. We've got bullet points.
Exactly,
we're talking about this now.
Yeah. We've got bullet points and we talk off the cuff. I mean, it's something we're relatively comfortable doing, but I think I'm comfortable doing it because I did it so much for interviews.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I did have one trainee who I believe he memorized all his answers in all interview questions, and I was actually quite impressed by it. And as I was talking to him and trying to throw in some curveball questions, I think he still did really well with those. But it just sounded a little bit strange. I was super impressed that he could memorize that amount of detail, which was actually a good thing that I thought he could memorize it. But there's something just not quite right about memorizing everything. It didn't sound as truthful or as authentic, I think.
And you do then run the risk of answering the wrong question.
Yeah.
Where, you might ask someone, tell me about a time you had to make a difficult decision, and they're like, oh yeah, difficult situation. Yep. And they start telling you about a difficult situation, and clearly it's just because they've memorized an answer and they just really wanted to get it out. So, and again, if you're not good at talking off the cuff, then I think practice. Don't wait till you get an interview offer. Just start. If from this moment you want to do anesthesia, I think you should start, find people. Obviously, if you have trouble finding people, you can contact lots of people. So my principles for formulating your answers, the things that I always thought of, think and rethink and rewrite and reformulate your answers. The first answers you think of are not really ever going to be the best.
Yep. And it's good because you've probably worked on these since internship. So I used to have the same document, which then turned into a PowerPoint where I have a question and answer.
Yeah, nice.
And then I just continually add to that. And it's actually quite satisfying. Each year, I think about more clinical scenarios that have just happened. I go, wow, yeah, I've had some really great experiences. This is great. And it becomes this nice little bank of questions.
And you have more life experience to add to it. That's not, when I was school prefect.
Exactly. Imagine as an intern when you're in a difficult decision, you're like, to get 1 liter of fluid or 2. Difficult decision. Whereas now it's some serious difficult decisions. Awake fiber optic or... Yeah, good. Okay, so you've written here, practice. I think you mentioned it a bit more. And I think you've gone through a bit of this. Like, literally, what did you do to practice?
So I had a few approaches. So I was really lucky in that when we were applying for the jobs, I just had a friend who I kind of knew a bit loosely, who I thought was a genuinely nice person. And I just messaged her and said, hey, do you want to practice together? And then we kind of just sat down and did everything together, all of from quick care to the program. And we very early on said, look, we'll share everything we have. We won't hold anything back. We won't compete with each other. We'll just be completely honest. And that worked really well. And I think I was quite fortunate in finding someone who was happy to do that.
How about if they had an answer that you really liked? Did you ever copy an answer?
I think we had a few moments where we wanted to, but we always rephrased it enough because I think people knew we were quite good friends by the time we were playing for college, and we didn't.
It's like you're interviewing the same person. Yeah. Amazing.
I think, to be fair, if I think we were interviewed by 2 separate panels because there's 2 panels on the day, but they probably would have realized that we had a very similar approach because we just we worked from like March or April, all the way to September. So there's a lot of work.
Okay, so how long were you practicing for?
So it changes. So for the quick care job, I probably said I would have practiced about 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And then for the anesthetic program, we started early and slow. So we started in about March. Yep. And we did maybe once every 2 weeks. And just spend lots of time thinking, lots of time chatting to people and formulating ideas.
That's a really good idea in terms of make it part of your DNA rather than cramming it into your short-term memory. And it's interesting to hear you speak about how long you've tried, because I think every year people have to seemingly have to do more practice, which is a bit annoying because it becomes a bit of an arms race. I remember for my med school interviews, my practice was in the hotel room the day before the interview. And my mum wondering what the hell I was doing. And then I practiced 2 weeks before my interviews, which people thought was a lot. But I can imagine that. Did you practice for your med school interviews?
I did, but again, not a lot. Probably 2 weeks.
I get 2 weeks. So
by myself for most of it.
The distance between me and Kaz is about that 2 week mark. From med school to internship and training. Okay, I think I did a very similar thing. I had one of my, so had lots of people to practice with. I found registrars above me to practice with. One of my mates was corporate, got him to ask me questions as well. And that
would have been really useful.
Yeah, and one of the most cringeworthy things was talking in front of a mirror and talking to my relatives, like my sister, and that was most difficult. But if you got to think, if you can speak in front of your sister or someone you care about, or a good mate who's going to, I don't know, just have a go at you for saying stupid answers, that will make you just can't shy away from that discomfort.
Exactly. Yeah. And you want to put yourself in as much uncomfortable positions as possible. So I practice with a lot of consultants. And there's just something about being in the presence of a consultant that, makes you a bit on edge and very self-aware and very self-conscious that I think is really useful. So I came in a lot and did lots of practice with consultants around the department. I did lots with ATYs. Yep. A couple of fellows, and just really anyone.
I'm worried now if people ask me for too much interview practice, I won't have time. But
so I guess kind of going back to the thing, I think everyone prepares for a different amount of time, and I'm very mindful not to be prescriptive about how early you should study. I generally like interviews, but I just decided I'm doing a quick care job. I'm trying to get on to anesthesia. If I'm not trying my best and I don't get on, I'll feel pretty stupid. But in saying that, I didn't stress myself out. I took breaks, I took time off. We went away before the interviews and stuff. So I think that's all really important. If you're someone, I think at the very least, the very least, I would say 6 weeks. But I think you need to start thinking about these answers earlier, even if you're not practicing.
And get your resources, write them down, have a good format to do it. Okay, that's good. Awesome. So we've gone through that. Now, what are the different types of interviews? So, pretty much most medical interviews are a panel. And it's, like you mentioned, it's good to find out exactly how many, but it varies between 3 to 6 people. I don't think I've ever seen more than 6 people. And often it can be different staff members or medical workforce, as you mentioned here, community members, as well as your anaesthesia staff. And depending on the job, so for critical care jobs, it'll be anaesthesia, emergency, and ICU as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a good point to raise, is if you do have other specialties so if you're applying for a critical care job, most critical care jobs are ostensibly a pre-anesthetic job. But keep in mind that it is still a critical care job. So I would be mindful about going in there and just saying anesthetics. I think to a degree you need to say you're applying for a critical care position. You do, depending on the job, you do a certain period in anesthesia, but an equal period in other specialties. So if you're going there saying, oh, well, I don't care about anything other than anesthesia, the other two to whatever members on the panel might be less inclined to pick you. So just something that
that's
I would
true,
definitely keep in mind.
And to think that, you get so many vital skills from doing ED and ICU that are completely. Where do you learn most of your central lines, for example, or any kind of sepsis management
or medicine?
Or medicine. That's right. Hey, we do medicine. So tell us about the MMI.
So the MMI is not really done in critical care anesthesia. It's done nothing for the pediatric program. It's done for a lot of internship programs. And I'm not 100% sure about the surgical program. I think they tend to vary. So MMI is essentially a multi-mini interview. You have multiple rooms with 1 to 2 interviewers, and they each ask a single question. Sometimes you backtrack through each room and get asked a second question. And I think the idea behind the MMI is you take away any prejudices, you balance out any harsh markers with pleasant markers, and you take away any potential personal biases you might have towards people. So from a purely academic statistical perspective, it seems like a better model.
But then you've got to get congruence. It's not like someone can go in the panel and go, hey, what do you think? And then change their answer based on a feeling of another person or the group.
Great. So we've kind of talked a lot about that. And I think I can't stress enough, don't wait until you get an offer to start practicing. So I guess in addition to going through these questions, what are some other things you can do to prepare?
So you've done a really great list, which I completely agree with here. So if you go on the ANSCA website, I'm not sure how many people will be ANSCA members. I think there could be a fair few, but you can look up the college statements, the professional document series, and there's some very interesting documents there about various standards and policies. Maybe, I shall go through the list of things. So college statements or college documents, what are the hospitals concerned about at present? You can go on the hospital website. Even just keeping up with local news is probably an interesting and relevant thing. Relevant issues in your area, recent publications. For example, the PADI trial was just released, a few weeks ago, as well as the new PONV, postoperative nausea vomiting guidelines, and just any other relevant things, new policies. COVID obviously is the most significant thing to happen in our lifetimes, not the century, for healthcare.
So interestingly, last year, obviously COVID was very centric, but I think for 3 separate colleges and another 2 kind of hospital jobs, they all asked about COVID. One of the jobs was almost like, I think half the questions were variations of the topic about COVID. So I think, as you said, you just have to be very aware of what's happening.
Which is not too difficult. Like if you go to meet up with anyone, dinner parties, friends, whatever.
We talk about.
It comes up at some stage, right? Because it's when people talk about what they do and what affects them, and this is what affects us right now. So there's ways to access this information. So for example, the college professional documents are probably a little bit too detailed for what you need to know, but knowing that they exist. But the college does put out statements, and even just the front homepage of the college website, as well as that's ansca.edu.au, I think, or even the Australian Society of Anaesthetists, they will have a lot of relevant stuff on their homepage. And I think if you're a pre-training years, you can probably become a member of the ASA for free as well. So
I think you can,
so that might be useful. And just keeping abreast with these just these, whatever new topics there are, I think is always useful.
And you can always ask a current trainee for access to the bulletins. So I went through the last 3 or 4 bulletins prior to my interview, and you kind of identify what the big topics are for the college. So in the last few years, they were kind of Indigenous health. They did a lot of work in kind of gender equity recently as well, and obviously COVID. And then there's a big revamp of the trainee portfolio system and the assessment process, and some of the big trials. So I think knowing a little bit about them, you don't have to memorize everything about them, but knowing what the goals are, what the approach is, I think is it's a quick takeaway.
It's almost, I mean, the level to which we're talking about a lot of things here, it really is almost like studying for an exam to a small degree. But again, don't be overwhelmed. Being aware of certain things and just consuming, like immersing yourself in this over a period of time is probably the best, most useful thing you can do.
Yeah.
And
I think this is definitely like when you've done everything else, I think you look at this stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Get the stuff we're going to do in the next episode, which is questions, get that sorted, know yourself. And then there's the icing on the cake. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so I've talked about this on another podcast, but
Lahira's favorite topic.
Yeah, preparation, right? Is there any value in doing a dry run on the day? Of the day, sorry.
Yeah, so I haven't done this before, but I think there is some value depending on how much anticipation and anxiety it's causing you, and I think it's fine to do so. A dry run, I guess, to kind of clarify, would be pretending like you're going to the interview, finding a place to park, knowing where to park, knowing how far it is to walk, finding out where the nearest cafe is.
And one of the things, like, I don't know how many times you've had to go to a wedding or something and you haven't tried on your suit until that morning. And,
doesn't really button up. Yeah.
I got to be honest, a couple of times I've just gone, oh, this won't do. I've literally gone to a store down on Chapel Street and just bought a suit off the rack and just gone straight to the wedding. And so I do not let that happen for interviews or anything that's super important.
Yeah. So try your suit, get it dry cleaned, get all that stuff organized.
Get someone else to iron it. I do a terrible job at that. So
I just give it to the dry cleaner. I'm like, make it pretty.
That's right. That's right.
Get that haircut. Shave for the men. I can't really comment on what our female colleagues have to do to get ready, but I think get everything you need to do well in advance and prepare yourself. Don't leave anything to the last moment.
That's good. If you feel good in yourself, like your suit fits and your hair isn't, the hair is the way you want it to be, whatever that is. It just makes you feel. It makes me feel so much better to do that.
Need to go in with the fresh cutler.
Yeah, that's right.
So you actually did a dry run for your Viva, didn't you?
Yeah,
you actually drove there.
I drove down there. It was very close anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. So I drove the 5 kilometers or whatever it was, and just went, oh, yep, that's the building. Yeah, it's a busy road. There's no parking there. There is parking around the corner. Yeah. Good. I mean, I always get somewhere early. In general, but. Yeah. Definitely for the exam. I'm a person that just wants to get there. I don't mind sitting around for half an hour to an hour as long as I'm there, because things will happen and you just don't want any kind of traffic hiccup, or say you're getting a cab. I feel like these days Ubers just aren't getting on time anymore. The number of cancellations I've got with rideshare apps has been terrible. So I'd probably book a cab these days just to make sure that I actually actually turns up.
Or just get there really early. So or you can get someone to drive you. Organize to have the day off if you can. I think makes a huge difference. So I think I just happen to have the day off because of my roster, which is really nice, because it meant I had the day off beforehand. I had the day off on the day, which meant I could just relax afterwards and kind of grab a drink and relax a bit. That's which I think is and. I didn't really do a dry run, but I think because I had someone else driving me on the day, I could kind of let that part go, and I just kind of liked it. I wasn't doing any preparation beforehand. I just wanted to really get in the zone.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
So I think we covered most of the things for this first topic. So just to kind of do a bit of a recap. So we've pretty much gone through the whole point of an interview. What really is this panel trying to determine? how should you prepare, and the different types of interviews that you can have, as well as a few other things to prepare in terms of the venue and other documents and other relevant things around your specialty. But yeah, the next episode, so what are we going to cover in the next few episodes?
So we thought we'd go through all kind of the common types of questions that you're likely to get in an interview at this level, obviously with a slant towards anesthesia and critical care, predominantly anesthesia. So we're going to go through what we think are the two key questions. So the motivation, which is why do you want to do anesthesia, and your brand, which is why should we pick you when there's 700 people behind you. And then next we go on to situational questions, which are the classic tell us about a time type of questions, which I think can be quite challenging. And then we're going to go a bit more into crisis resource management, so CRM, really getting into leadership, teamwork, communication, and those kind of questions. Then broadly into personal attributes, strengths, weaknesses, and a bit more the general questions. And then finally, so there's a couple more things. And then professional and college questions, and clinical questions, and where those might come up. And then the dreaded lateral thinking questions, or outside the bucket.
Which are actually the easiest. Now, interestingly, both in CADS, we pretty much categorize these things separately, and then we brought it together as we met today. And pretty much we have literally gone through exactly the same thing. So I think there's a lot of concordance. That's the word I was looking for. Concordance in in the types of questions that we thought could potentially be asked. And I think I do believe in kind of the 90-10 rule. So 10% of your preparation will account for 90% of your questions, really, and we'll hopefully be able to go through some of that as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, the next few episodes, we're not sure how many episodes that's going to be, but we'll get onto that. And so thank you, everyone. Thanks very much for watching and listening. Again, please share this with anyone who might be interested, especially now that we're coming up to applications and interviews. And yeah, we'll see you all next time. Thanks very much.